Call to order the Planning and Zoning Commission meeting, 6 p.m. Monday, November the 14th, 2022, Granbury City Hall, City Council Chambers. First, I'd like to start with public comments on agenda items. These are non-public hearing agenda items. Are there any speakers?
I have no speaker cards.
We have no speaker cards. We'll move to item C, the consent agenda, approval of the October 17th, 2022 minutes.
So
Do you have any
moved.
corrections? I have a motion for approval of the minutes.
Motion approved.
I have a motion for approval. Do I have a second?
Second.
I have a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? Passes. All right, the public hearing starts with agenda item D1. We have in our presence the City Park Board, and they will open with D1. Then after D1 is completed, they will go into our private session.
On behalf of the Parks Board here at Granbury, thank you very much for allowing us to be here. And we do have a quorum here, so we're ready to go. Thank you very much.
No, who's starting this thing?
Lane, I'm with the City of Granbury. I just wanted to thank y'all for sharing a few moments. It helps Half Associates. We kind of killed two birds with one stone here. Just a brief kind of history on why we're here. In our 2020 Parks Master Plan, it was identified that we needed more trails, improvements on sidewalks. So that's really what this plan identifies. In the early stages of this plan and the workings, we realized we needed to pay a lot more attention to bicycle traffic and bike paths also. So I would just like to turn it over to Kendall Howard. That's the second time I've done that. Kendall Howard and Kelsey McNeese for the presentation.
All right, thank you. Good evening, commissioners and park board members. So as Aaron mentioned, this active transportation and recreation, is that better? Okay, great, thank you. So this active transportation and recreation plan really does focus on not just the recreational trails that are found in Granbury, but also the sidewalk network and on-street bikeways as well. So opportunities for people to recreate on trails and then also get to where they're going on either by foot or bicycle, basically providing an alternative to driving. So what we wanted to do tonight, some of you have been involved in this process, but we did want to give a brief project recap of where we've been so far and how we've gotten to this draft plan stage. And then Kelsey will give a high-level overview of the recommendations and then talk about how we are proposing to implement this plan over time. So as Aaron mentioned, this did come about from that 2020 Parks and Recreation Master Plan to identify trail and sidewalk needs and provide guidance both for improving the existing system, so you have a great existing spine trail with the hike and bike trail, Moments in Time hike and bike trail, but then also looking at opportunities to expand the existing system as Granbury continues to grow. It will guide future expenditures for trail and sidewalk development, and then having an adopted trail and bikeways master plan can help set the stage for receiving grant funding, whether it's from regional, state, or federal partners for implementing recommendations. So in terms of the process, we started with a lot of data collection and inventory to see what's on the ground today. We did a series of needs assessment to assess the conditions and look at things like trip potential and crash data. We also looked at opportunities and constraints to determine where additional facilities might best be utilized. And then we used all that input to develop the draft recommendations and finally the implementation action plan. So in terms of public and stakeholder engagement, we did have a steering committee that was formed to help guide this process. So they served as an advisory board for this plan process. We did have a public open house back in August, and I think we had over 50 people attend, so we had pretty good attendance. So there was a lot of good feedback that we got on specific connections that people wanted to see. And then since we did the Parks and Recreation Plan so recently, just a couple years ago, we had a lot of good input that we felt was still pretty relevant and valid, so we drew upon that input as well. So in terms of the existing system, for the off-street trails, so these are trails that are located away, primarily away from roadways, there's about 3.5 miles, so that's primarily made up of the Moments in Time hike and bike trail. And then in terms of park loop trails, these are trails that are internal to parks, like within the Granbury City Park. These are meant more for recreational purposes rather than connecting you to point A to point B. There's about 2 miles of existing park loop trails. And then on-street bikeways, there is a on-street bikeway facility leading to Hewlett Park, just about 0.2 miles of that facility. And then citywide, when you look at the entire city network, there's just under 50 miles of sidewalk. So that's kind of our starting point, and the needs assessments that we did to determine where additional connections could go included trip potential analysis. So this looked at where the major trip generators within the community are. So looking at neighborhoods, employment centers, schools, as well as level of comfort. So we did an analysis of the existing roadway facilities to determine which ones might be comfortable enough for cyclists to potentially ride in the streets. So looking at things like speeds and traffic volumes. We also looked at crash data. There are some existing sources that have instances of bicycle and pedestrian crash locations, so that helps us identify where there are safety issues within the community that need to be addressed. We also looked at existing regulatory documents, like the development code, to determine are there some tweaks that could be made to make it more friendly to providing trail and bikeway infrastructure. And then we looked at major barriers and opportunities as well for future connectivity. So with that, I'm going to turn it to Kelsey to walk through the draft recommendations.
Thank you, Kendall. So I'm going to walk through our draft recommendations. So to kind of start with the steps that got us to our recommendations, we formed a vision, and we worked with our steering committee, who we met with a couple of times through this plan process, to create our vision statement, which reads: the city of Granbury will be the home to a well-connected, accessible, and safe trail and bikeway network that serves the active transportation, public health, economic development, and quality of life needs for the community. We also developed a few guiding principles and goals that have helped inform our recommendations. We were really focused on things like safety. Sorry, can you not hear me? Safety, connectivity, and access, which contribute to quality of life of residents. So you can see we have community connectivity, creating a comprehensive system, accessibility and safety, making sure that the network is safe and comfortable for users. But building an identity, having a brand for this system, being recognizable to users, whether they're residents or visitors. Regional recognition, this is a great asset for the city to leverage, regionally known for bikeway traffic and for trail recreation is a great opportunity for the city to leverage. And then partnerships and funding, so how to get this plan implemented. So our recommendation network is made up of 3 total networks that have different facilities within each. So our first network is the multi-use trail network. So within that, we have shared use paths and side paths. So these are paved trails that support both pedestrians and cyclists, and they serve mobility and recreation needs. We have our on-street bikeway network. So we have a handful of facilities such as bike lanes, bicycle boulevards, signed routes, and wide shoulders. So depending on the types of roadway, Kendall mentioned we did a need assessment. We looked at things like traffic speed and volume. This would determine the type of a facility that would be appropriate for the roadway. And then we looked at our pedestrian network, which were sidewalks and park loop trails. So these really focus on the sidewalks supporting recreation and transportation, and then the park loop trails really are focused on that recreation aspect of the plan. So I know it's a little hard to read, but this is our multi-use trail network. I'm going to walk through each of those networks I explained and highlight some of the key recommendations that we're making. So for the multi-use trail network, we are looking at creating connectivity from the current network, filling in those gaps, extending from the Moments in Time hike and bike trail. Some of the things we're recommending is a shared use path along US 377, which is part of TxDOT's redevelopment plan. So incorporating that ongoing process into our recommendations. Also looking at a multi-use trail along the 567 loop. And then looking at how we can incorporate recreation and transportation with a multi-use trail around the Granbury City Park, the disc golf course there, perimeter trail. And then some aspirational things that we look at, because we're looking long range, is a rails to trail project along the railroad corridor. So our on-street bikeway network, we're looking at both recreation and transportation here, so connecting into residential streets, into the downtown area and connecting to key destinations along roadways. We also know that there's a big community of long-distance cyclists, so creating pathways for cyclists to get into and out of the city, going back to that goal of regional recognition. And then connecting to future developments that are happening in the north part of the city, and connecting into neighborhoods, especially around schools. So our pedestrian network, we looked at sidewalks a little bit differently than we looked at trails and bikeways, because you have a pretty robust sidewalk network. So a lot of the recommendations were made are in these three categories, which include safety improvements. So identifying areas that need updates, segments that are in poor condition, or where improvements can be made to make them safer and more comfortable. Identifying critical gaps, areas where their connectivity is lacking, where there's gaps in the sidewalk system, and through filling in these gaps would create a better connected pedestrian network. And then also looking at future connections, so looking at areas that there are not sidewalks today, or where development may happen in the future where sidewalks should be implemented. And then park loop trails, another aspect of our pedestrian network. We looked at around Lambert Branch Park, connecting the newly built trails there down into the hike and bike trail, and then also looking at the former golf course, potentially providing a perimeter trail around the golf course to support recreation needs. So all of our recommendations are on this map that you probably can't see from this distance, but some of the key things we looked at is really connecting people to key community destinations like downtown, connecting residential areas into downtown across 377. We know that's a major barrier. And then filling in gaps in the system. So really expanding the network and providing community-wide connectivity through active transportation and recreation. So now a next part of our process was prioritizing our recommendations. So we went through a process of identifying some criteria, and this helps us to help determine timeframes for implementation. So we went through this process for both our multi-use trail network and our on-street bikeway network. So we individually created a list of criteria, and then we walked through with our steering committee to identify the importance and weight that we would give to each criterion, and then we scored the segments based on these to help determine implementation timeframes. So the multi-use trail criteria and the on-street bikeway criteria have some overlap, but the multi-use trail, we look at connecting key destinations. That's important to connect people to places that they want to go. We also looked at if the segment connects to existing trail or bikeway facilities, is it expanding the network? Does it solve a safety issue or barrier, improving the comfort that the user experiences? Is it improving the existing system? Is it filling in a critical gap in connectivity and accessibility? Connectivity is to schools was also brought up as very important, making sure that there's safer routes for students to use that are non-motorized to get to schools. Also identifying proximity to residential areas, how close these new segments were to residential parts of the city, residential neighborhoods for people to easily access. Was there public interest and was there need and want from the community for these segments? What's the feasibility of implementation? How easily could they be implemented? What coordination would need to happen? And the amount of environmentally sensitive area that would be disturbed if new segments were built. So for the on-street bikeway, there was some overlap, but the new ones that were introduced into this was, do these segments support long-distance bicycle rides? We know that there's an active bicyclist community and the want for long-distance rides that have safe and designated facilities. And then level of comfort. Does this facility improve a roadway in a way that makes it more comfortable for users to be on, not just people who are biking for recreation that are confident riders, but users of all ages and ability. So using this criteria, we individually scored our multi-use trails and then our on-street bikeways. So our multi-use trails, we have 3 tiers. So the first tier is focused on those near-term items, those that should be implemented initially as development happens or redevelopment occurs. And they focus on extending the existing network and filling the gaps. So it's kind of the critical need segments that we've identified. Tier 2 should be implemented after the Tier 1 segments have been implemented, and these focus on expanding connections as growth is happening, especially in areas where development is anticipated and connecting the edges of the city. Our third tier, these segments are focused on longer term, more visionary projects. So an example of that would be the Rails to Trail segment along the railroad corridor, and would be a little more complicated to implement, requiring more coordination and that sort of thing. So bikeways, I mentioned, it's a very similar process. So the Tier 1 bikeways, they're providing connections into neighborhoods and connecting neighborhoods to surrounding community destinations. Tier 2, which would be implemented after Tier 1, they are looking at areas of anticipated growth, connecting into those areas, and then also focusing on long-distance bicycle rides. Then Tier 3, again, is more long-term and visionary and would require a more complicated process to implement. So we also looked at policies, programs, and initiatives. So beyond infrastructure, we know that implementing policies and programs can help support, especially in the near term, the connectivity of the system. So some of the things we looked at, we looked at the people who would be responsible, the organizations, the boards, committees within and outside of Granbury that would be responsible for initiating these programs and policies, and also the level of effort that would be required in order to initiate them. So some of the near-term, sorry, it's a little far for me to read. So one of the low-level effort would be updating the Code of Ordinances to include both acceptable and prohibited uses along trails and bikeways. So that's something that can happen, identifying the types of uses that are believed to be appropriate. A medium term would be something like encouraging bicycle racks and parkings and amenities at commercial and residential areas. And then a higher level of effort would be conducting a sidewalk condition audit to document the conditions of existing sidewalks and prioritize future improvements. So that we have a list in our report that identifies the policies and programs necessary to support a comprehensive system. So at this time, I'm going to open up for questions from the Planning and Zoning Commission.
Hello, I've got several questions for you. Are these concrete trails, or are they other type of hard surfaces, or what's the plan there?
Yes, so the multi-use trails, which are our shared use trails, and our side paths would be varying widths depending on where they are located, but they would be concrete trails.
Okay. And is there a typical width on these trails?
So the side paths would be preferred 10 feet, and then the shared use would be preferred 10 to 12 feet.
Okay.
Yeah, and I'll just add, that's consistent with AASHTO standards, so the minimum for a shared use trail is
Right.
10 feet. But in areas where there's anticipated to be more usage and more demand, it's preferred to be at least 12 feet to accommodate multiple user types.
Okay. What's your guesstimate on how long it's going to take to complete, even like 2 tiers? Have any idea?
Yeah, so there's, a lot of moving pieces that go into that. Part of it is when will development or redevelopment occur? So a lot of these recommendations won't be implemented until there's new development that goes into that area. So, it'd be on the ownership of the developer to implement. But then, obviously, as development occurs, that could create some gaps in the trail or sidewalk network. And that's where we feel that grant applications could really come into play. So with the federal infrastructure bill that was passed, there's a lot of money that's coming down the pipeline to communities for trail and bikeway development. So with this master plan, that will put Granbury ahead of other communities that don't have a plan in place for a comprehensive network of trails and bikeways. But I guess in short, it could, we really do look at, 10 to 20 year timeframes. Yeah, more longer term.
Okay, well, that's good news about the money, for sure. If we ever do get to Tier 3, how would that work with 377? That's not going to be tied to the main road, is it? It would be separated, I assume.
So TxDOT is currently in design of reconstructing that roadway, and part of the design does include a 10-foot side path on within the right-of-way on each side, on the north and south side of the roadway, but there will be a physical barrier from the motor vehicle lanes and the side path, yes.
Okay, very good. Thanks a lot.
Are there any further questions from the boards?
How much of the trail system, I guess in miles, would be not concrete? Any of it, or is it all concrete?
So the current network, since it's primarily focused on off-street trails like shared use paths and side paths, those are recommended to be concrete. But there are opportunities within, say, within existing parks to maybe look at soft surface trails. But we were primarily focused on concrete paved trails for this effort.
Kara, this is, are they dismissed now at this time? It says recommendation for approval, or is that a public vote?
Sure. So you're in an item that has a public hearing component to this. I would suggest that if the Parks Commission has further questions, we would need a name and just statement that you're on the Parks Commission, just for the record, so we can capture that into our minutes. And I had understood that the Parks Commission would then depart after the presentation, and we would continue the public hearing. It would be in order to see if there's any public comments on this item.
Okay. So there's no vote of the Planning and Zoning Commission, though? It's a vote of the Park Board?
It's in their staff report. It is a recommendation to accept the plan, so it's a public hearing, and you could make such action. it will be forwarded to City Council for consideration.
Okay. Let me get down to that section, please.
Now, suggested action, the staff recommends acceptance of the plan.
Let me get down to that. All right. Are there no further questions? Yeah, I'll close the public hearing. I'll seek a motion for approval of the recommendation from the City Park Department.
I have a question. On the surface, do we need to basically approve this with conditions if we want it all concrete or some?
I couldn't answer that. Did you hear that question, Kyra?
I did hear the question. I think that is typically you make a recommendation, you can make a recommendation with conditions or suggestions to the plan that's been presented.
All right. I'll seek a motion again for approval of the suggested action by the City Park Board.
Chair, I move for approval as presented.
I have a motion by Mr. Haas for approval. Do I have a second?
Second.
And a second by Mr. Klaas. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Nope.
Passes the recommendation for approval.
On behalf of the Park Board, we appreciate it very much, Planning Zoning, for allowing us to be here. And we have so many people at the bank, half associates there, our entire Park Board. Joan Snyder, who actually chaired the Trails Commission. We appreciate that. We'd also like to thank City Council, Mayor, Michael Ross, Chris Kaufman. Thank y'all for your attendance and for not allowing us to continue on the convention. We will now adjourn the Park Board here and we'll continue to go to the Park Board Council meeting.
There we go.
Thank you very much. We appreciate it.
Get there.
Glad you guys developed this plan. Every step in the right direction.
Yeah. Yeah. Big time. Okay. We'll move into agenda item D2, SUP 2022-21, request of 4 Shelby Inc. for a specific use permit to allow a short-term rental STR residential unhosted in a residential 8400 R8.4 zoning district. The property is addressed as 511 North Travis Street. Kara.
Thank you. Amy will be making the presentations tonight, so Amy, if you would.
Thank you. This slide represents the location of the property. It is the location's at 511 North Travis, as stated in the prior slide. The size of the lot is 0.257 acres, which equals out to 11,195 square feet. The property is zoned single-family residential, 84,000. Platting history for this property. It's the north half of Lot 2, Block 46 of the Trash Addition. The purpose of this application is to request a specific use permit for a short-term rental unhosted for the use of 2 bedrooms, single-family dwelling. This would be the first time the property would be operating with an approved specific use permit and certificate of occupancy. And the property is located in the HCO, the Historic Compatibility Overlay. The property is currently, as stated before, currently zoned single-family residential R8.4. The properties surrounding the site are also in the same zoning district, R.84. To the south, you have multifamily. Farther to the east, you have light commercial. And off of North Houston to the east is the beginning of the central business district. I'm going to go back to that slide after this one. So this right here is straight out of the staff report presented to the commission. This is also just stating in the table that the sites are around the property, subject property are zoned R8.4, and they all have a use of residential use. And I'll go back to this previous slide. This right here represents a 600-foot buffer surrounding the site with 3 unhosted short-term rentals in black that were established before the July 5th amendment. There is also 1 hosted bread and breakfast that was also established before the July 5th amendment. This slide here represents the site plan that was with the application. On the east side of the property, you'll notice there's a concrete drive that was put in that meets the criteria for 2 parking spaces. Let me verify that. Yes, 2 parking spaces. I wanted to make sure it wasn't 3. There's also, in the middle of the backyard, there's also a storm cellar. And there is a detached garage right here that will actually be used as, it's more of an open area that'll be for patio use. There will also be Fraser Fotinia that is not existing on the site now, but will be installed along the driveway to provide the headlight sweep screening for when when guests park, and it will keep them from the headlight sweep hitting the property next door. This slide here represents the floor plan that was submitted with the application. It indicates a 2-bedroom, 1 bedroom with a master. And this slide here is it's a current photo that was taken last week, and as you can see, the new driveway has been installed for 2 parking spaces. And this is the application that was submitted for the specific use permit. And with supplemental information that was in the staff report, it states that the property will be managed by Steve and Lena Fort. They reside in Granbury, and their contact number is provided on that supplemental documentation. On November 3rd, 2022, city staff mailed out 24 public notices to all property owners within 200 feet and on the municipal tax roll within 200 feet of the subject property. Notice on October 26 was also published in the Hood County News as required by state law and the zoning ordinance. As of this writing, 3 letters have been received in favor, and 1 letter has been received in opposition to the request. Staff recommends approval with the following conditions. 1-year SUP, specific use permit term, in which the applicant must apply for another SUP once the 1-year term is complete. 2, the site shall conform to the site plan Exhibit A in the proposed ordinance and the floor plan, Exhibit B and the proposed ordinance. The SUP shall be limited to not more than 2 bedrooms. Except as provided in these conditions, the SUP shall be subject to the supplemental standards as continued in the zoning ordinance. 5, this SUP is subject to all other city code requirements, permits, periodic inspections, and any inspection fee as established in the city's master fee schedule. Any violation of the supplemental land use standards or terms and conditions stipulated in the SUP may be deemed in violation of the zoning ordinance, and the SUP may become null and void, and or the certificate of occupancy may be revoked. 7, hard surface paving, concrete or asphalt installation prior to issuance of certificate of occupancy to comply with the 2 off-street parking requirements of 1 parking space per bedroom. The parking standard includes a 9 by 18 parking space size and the driveway maneuvering area. Your voting options for the specific use permit are approve as presented, approve with additional other conditions, continue the item to the next public hearing if more information is needed, or deny the request. Thank you.
All right, at this time, I'll open the public hearing. To approach the podium.
Hello. I'm Steve Fort. I live at 2408 Fame Court. I represent Fort Shelby. Basically, we've got 2 other houses on Rucker Street. You can go to 114 Rucker, and then the way on the other end at 410. These are houses that were in need of repair, including this house that we're asking about today. Ms. Couch, the lady that is doing the investment in these homes, has been looking at homes that needed restoration, and all these homes needed restoration. We're trying to do it right. This home previously was a Airbnb that was not listed with the city. We bought this home, contacted the city to find out whether or not it was listed. It was not. We're trying to do everything by the book and follow the rules of the city. She's invested quite a bit of money in these homes. We've been successful on the 114 Rucker, which is about 15 months old now. We've had 5 stars across the board for 15 months. 410 Rucker just went live last week, and we have 1 long-term rental in there right now. When I say long-term, they're in there for a month, and that's a long-term for a short-term rental. Are there some questions?
Commission have any questions of the applicant? No. All right. There are no questions for you, so we'll
Okay.
close the public hearing. The commission have any questions of the staff? By the way, the public card that you asked me was the applicant, so just to make note of that. So, all right, if there's no further questions, I'll open up for the entertain a motion.
Motion to approve as presented.
Would you like that as presented or with conditions, Mr. Erdman?
Excuse me?
Would you like that as presented or with?
As presented.
Okay, I have a motion as presented.
Discussion?
You need a discussion point?
Well, we don't have a second.
Yeah, I know. You were asking for a discussion before I asked for a second, though.
Okay.
So,
Nobody else seconded it.
all right, do I have a second as presented? Okay, the motion dies for lack of a second. Mr. Grace?
Yes, the staff would like to discuss conditions
The conditions were stated.
of the application.
Just for clarification, the voting option 1, approve as presented, includes the conditions that staff recommends. If you choose to change some of those conditions or add new conditions, that would be number 2.
Okay. I'll open the floor back up to entertain a motion for approval or denial.
I'll make a motion to approve with stated conditions.
I have a motion for approval with stated conditions by Mr. Moore. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Oh, wait, okay. I'll give it to Mr. Erdman. I have a second by Mr. Erdman. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Passes. All right. We'll go to D3. Let me get down the list here. D3 SUP 2022-20, request of Tom Rather for a specific use permit to allow a short-term rental STR residential unhosted in a residential 8400 R 8.4 zoning district. The property is addressed as 505 East Grove Street. Amy.
Thank you. As stated, the location of the property is at 505 East Grove Street. On this slide represents the location of the property off of Perkins Court and East Grove Street. It's the corner house there. The size of the lot is 0.13 acres, which equals out to 8,277 square feet. The zoning of the property is single-family residential 8.4. And the political platting history, it's Lot 4H, Block 4 of the Traylor Horton Edition. The purpose of the application is for the applicant to request a specific use permit for a short-term rental unhosted 3-bedroom single-family dwelling. The site features a covered patio attached to an accessory structure, and it is also located in the historic compatibility overlay. As stated, the property is zoned single-family residential 8.4. The sites to the northeast and west are also residential, single-family residential 8.4. And the site to the south is actually zoned R.7. This right here is the table that was pulled from the staff report showing the 4 properties to the north, south, east, and west adjacent to the subject property that are residential use, also zoned R8.4. This slide here shows the map of a 600-foot boundary surrounding the site, which would also include, as you see in the legend, any sort of short-term rental, either before or after the July 5th amendment. As you see, there are no short-term rentals located within a 600-foot boundary of 505 East Grove. This slide here represents the site plan that was submitted with the specific use permit application. As stated before, it's the corner lot, OS 505 East Grove and Perkins Court. The site also currently features a driveway that's existing that actually meets the criteria for dimensions for 3 parking spaces. And there's actually an existing fence on this side of the property that will be used as adequate screening for the headlight sweep for the adjacent property. This is the floor plan that was submitted with the application. And here are a few photos. This is the front of the house off of East Grove Street. And this is the side of the house off Perkins Court, where you can see the existing fence that'll show, that will represent screening with adequate parking for 3 bedrooms. This is the application that was submitted for the specific use permit. On November 3rd, city staff mailed out 20 public notices to all property owners within 200 feet and the municipal tax roll within 200 feet of the subject property. Notice on October 26, 2022 was also published in the Hood County News as required by state law and the zoning ordinance. As of this writing, 6 letters have been received in favor, and 3 letters have been received as in opposition to the request. Staff recommends approval with the following conditions. 1 year, a specific use permit term in which the applicant must apply for another SUP once the 1-year term is complete. The site shall conform to the site plan, Exhibit A, in the proposed ordinance, and the floor plan, Exhibit B, in the proposed ordinance. The SUP shall be limited to not more than 3 bedrooms. Except as provided in these conditions, the SUP shall be subject to the supplemental standards as contained in the zoning ordinance. This SUP is subject to all other city code requirements, permits, periodic inspections, and an inspection fee as established in the city's master fee schedule. Any violation of the supplemental land use standards or terms and conditions stipulated in the SUP may be deemed in violation of the zoning ordinance, and the SUP may become null and void, and/or the certificate of occupancy may be revoked. Hard surface paving, concrete or asphalt installation prior to this number 7 is irrelevant considering they already have existing adequate parking. The voting options for the SUP are 1, approve as presented, 2, approve with additional other conditions, 3, continue the item to the next public hearing if more information is needed, and 4, deny the request. Thank you.
Thank you. At this point, I'd like to open the public hearing. Would the applicant approach the podium?
Good evening, council members. My name is Tom Rather. I'm a lifetime member of the great state of Texas. I'm hoping to retire soon and move to Granbury and make this my permanent home. And I've submitted this application for a small short-term rental property. I've invested in another little business, and I want to present this application to you, and hopefully I can get y'all's approval and move on to the next step and get this little STR on the move. But I want you to consider my application and accept or approve it to the city council meeting next month. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Commissioners, do you have any questions of the applicant?
I've got one. Who's going to maintain the property?
I have a property manager, Taylor Mooney, brought here with me tonight.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Any questions of the city?
Yeah, where do you live, ma'am?
I live across the street. I live
From this? Okay, thank you.
Question for staff.
Okay.
Chair, I have several questions for staff.
Amy?
Question on clarification on the parking. This is a 3-bedroom rental. I believe, don't we require 3 parking spaces?
Correct.
The condition 7 says 2 parking spaces. Is there adequate parking there for three cars?
Yes, let me
right.
go back to the site plan. Actually, I'm going too far.
Oh, you don't have to show me the site plan. I'll take your word for it.
Okay. We've measured out the site plan, and it has adequate parking for 3 spaces. That was copied over from... Correct.
And-
Yeah, on the site plan, we require that they put the dimensions of the parking spaces, and obviously, it's a 3-bedroom STR, so we made sure that those dimensions met the requirement for 3 parking spaces.
There were 3 letters submitted in opposition. Did any of the letters give a reason for being opposed?
Let me pull our folder, and I can see if there's any sort of documentation for that opposition.
Thank you.
No speaker cards?
We had one opposition that came with additional letter, if you'd like me to read that for you. November 10th, 2022, to whom it may concern. We are opposed to the SDR. This action will likely lead to more SDRs in the area, as several developers have expressed interest in SDRs. We oppose it due to the large turnover of residents in the home. We oppose it due to the risk to home value. We oppose the SDR due to the possible increase in traffic on our cul-de-sac. We oppose the SDR due to the increased risk of security issues. We oppose it due to the increased risk to noise in the neighborhood. If this SDR is allowed, there is a potential of 3 more requests from recent purchases, one across the road from the SDR 505 East Grove. There are also 2 newly sold lots at 601 East Grove. Hold on. Our neighborhood is a close-knit community of people who look out for one another. We prefer to keep the neighborhood as such. Sincerely, Christy Denise Jonas and Elizabeth A. Jonas, 706 Perkins.
Thank you, Amy.
Any further questions of staff or the applicant? No further questions. I'll close the public hearing and entertain a motion.
Motion to approve as presented.
I have a motion for approval by Mr. Erdman. Do I have a second?
Second.
A second by Mr. Hobbs. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion passes.
Mr. Hallman?
Yes.
May I interrupt? Apologize. There's been a request to move up the items for the Granbury ASC edition, D6, accompanied with D7. If we could do that, that would be very helpful.
Go to D6.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Thank you.
Give me a moment here. We're going through 200 and something pages.
Should be able to go back to the first page at the beginning and then.
Yeah, I've got D7 already. Yeah, I'm close. It's not, yeah. And there we are. We are at D6. Okay. We are going to skip over 4 and 5 and go to D6, which is Z 2022-10, request of, I don't know, pronounce this, Geary General LLC, its general partner, rezone a 9.98 acre tract being Lot 1, Block 1 of the Granbury ASC addition from Interim Holdings IH to Business Commercial BC. The property is addressed as 1717 Paluxy Highway. Amy.
I've actually combined the slides as a request from the commission, so it's actually going to go through each. I'm going to actually show you a presentation of the zoning as well as the replat.
So read
as one
D7 in the
presentation.
record?
And then once I
Okay.
finish presenting, you can
Yeah.
go through your motions
Didn't see that.
individually.
All right, D7 is request of Geary General LLC, its general partner, to replat Lot 1, Block 1 of the Granbury ASC addition as Lot 1R and 1R1, Block 1 of the Granbury ASC addition. The property is addressed as 1717 Paluxy Highway, PL 2022-27.
Thank you. Okay, as stated, the location of this property is at 1717 Paluxy Highway. As represented on this slide is a location map of the property. The size of this lot is 9.982 acres. The zoning is voluntarily, they were actually voluntarily annexed in 2007 and zoned interim holding at that time, and it's still currently zoned IH. Platting history, it's Lot 1, Block 1 of the Granbury ASC addition. And the purpose is the applicant is proposing to subdivide the property into 2 separate lots in order to sell the developed part of the property to the surgical center and dedicate an access easement to the back of the lot. This slide here represents the existing zoning of IH in green for the property. The existing surgical center on site was developed prior to voluntary annexation in 2007. It is considered clinic or office medical use in the zoning ordinance, which is not permitted in the interim holding IH zoning district. In order to subdivide the lot with the replat, the applicant must rezone the property to business commercial. This table here, it was pulled straight from the staff report. It represents the zoning for the north, south, east, and west properties. The north and south property adjacent to the subject property are in the ETJ, and they are also unimproved, undeveloped. The east and west property adjacent to the site are both business commercial with a medical clinic office's use. So they are consistent with the use of the subject property. The future land use map shows that the site business commercial or the proposed zoning for business commercial is consistent with the adopted future land use plan, which recommends the site as retail office, which you can see represented in red. It's the L. The comprehensive plan, this is a blurb from our comprehensive plan that shows the definition of what we and the city of Granbury define as retail office. And it aligns with the medical use for this existing site. This slide shows the replat that was submitted with the plat application. As you can see, right here on the west side of the property, there is a proposed easement that will actually be an access easement to this back lot once developed. And they're trying to apply for the replat so that they can have two lots. So this line right here where my marker is, if I can keep my hand steady, is the lot line that they're wanting to create to have an undeveloped site, which they will continue to own, and then have the lot to the north for them to sell. This is a photo of the site coming off of Biloxi Highway. It has a shared drive with the property next to it. So on the left of the photo is actually the surgical center. And this is a photo from the actual highway that kind of shows you behind the site. It's undeveloped. It's kind of, there's a lot of hills back there, so it's difficult to see, but you can see that there's really nothing on the back property. This is the application for the change of zoning, and this slide represents the application for the replat. On November 3rd, 2022, city staff mailed out 7 public notices to all property owners within 200 feet and on the municipal tax roll within 200 feet of the subject property. Notice on October 26, 2022 was also published in the Hood County News as required by state law and the zoning ordinance. As of this writing, 1 letter has been received in favor and 0 letters have been received in opposition to the request. A prior board action, as stated, was on September 6, 2022. The City Council approved a development agreement and moratorium waiver to allow for a no-impact replat and to allocate the responsibilities and requirements of the developer until the moratorium ordinance expires or is revoked. Refer to the development agreement and the moratorium waiver for terms, responsibilities, and requirements of the City of Granbury and Granbury Health Real Estate Investors LP. And that is included in your staff report, that development agreement. There were no variances requested, and all comments have been addressed from the DRC. Staff recommends approval of the change in zoning. Your voting options are to approve the request for the change in zoning from IH to BC, or to deny the request for the change in zoning from IH to BC. And I'll open it to you.
Thank you, Amy. Any questions from staff? No questions for staff. I'd like to open the public hearing, and if the applicant can approach the podium.
Yes, sir. Thank you. I'm Les Hill. I represent the Granbury Health Real Estate Investors.
Thank you. Do you have any presentation at all you'd like to? Just entertain questions only?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Any questions of the applicant? We have no other speaker cards, so thank you very much. I'm going to close the public hearing, and we will, I believe, Kira, this is 2 voting options. We'll do 2 votes. I'd like to open up, entertain a motion for D6, the change in zoning.
Recommend approval of change in zoning.
I have a recommendation for approval for change in zoning by Mr. Grace. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Second by Mr. Erdman. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion passes. Change in zoning. All right. Entertain a motion for D7, approval of the replat.
Make a motion for approval.
A motion for approval by Mr. Moore.
Second.
I'm sorry, Mr. Grace, did you second? Okay, second by Mr. Grace, all in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion for replat passes. Thank you. All right. D4 now, is that correct?
That's correct.
And this will go very similar to this one. It's also a zoning request with an SUP.
So open both? You want to open both those then? D4 and D5?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, we'll open D4 and D5. D4, Z 2022-09, request of Brian and Nancy Romberg to rezone a .43 acre tract of Lot PT, Block 87 of the Barton Addition from residential 12,000 R12 and light commercial LC to residential 12,000 R-12. The property is located at 701 Lipan Highway. D5, request of Brian and Nancy Romberg for a specific use permit to allow a short-term rental STR residential unhosted in a residential 12,000 R12 zoning district. The property is addressed as 701 Lipan Highway, SUP 2022-22. Amy.
Thank you. Let me get my, okay. All right, this slide represents the location of the property at 701 Lipan Highway. It is also a corner lot, as stated before, with the 505 East Grove. The size of the lot is 0.43 acres. Little zoning history, it's actually split zoned for light commercial and single-family residential, R12 since 2001. Hence, we needed to do the change in zoning to make the lot actually fully R12. Platting history, a part of the 87th block of the Barton Addition. It's part of the historical plat in our office. The purpose of this application is to request an SUP for a short-term rental unhosted, used for a 3-bedroom single-family dwelling. And the property is located in the historic compatibility overlay. Where did I? Okay. The subject property is, like I said, split zone for LCR 12. Actually, let me go back to my zoning map, sorry. And I'm going to actually show you here where this black line is. That's where your split zone is. The pink represents light commercial, and the beige color is the single family, R12. And they're applying to rezone the single family residential 12,000 in order to comply with zoning ordinance section 1.3.2 for the zoning district to follow lot lines and to align with the future land use plan. This is pulled straight from the staff report. The subject property, as stated before, is LCR 12 with a proposed use of residential short-term rental unhosted. The property to the north and the south are also split zone for LCR 12. The east property is light commercial and the west property is residential 12. The site on the east property, light commercial, is unimproved, and the other 3 sites have a residential use. And you can see that here on the zoning map. This slide represents a 600-foot boundary around the property, and there are, hold on a second. There's 5 unhosted short-term rentals that were established prior to the July 5th Amendment. And I can't see the rest of it, and I don't have my slide. But hopefully that's visible. Actually, here we go. And there's 1 hosted on the south side of the circle. The buffer area is 1 hosted bed and breakfast that was established prior to the July 5th Amendment. And I can highlight that if y'all can't see it. I probably should have done that for myself. And there it is. Okay. Okay. All right, this slide represents the future land use map. As stated before, single-family residential 12,000 is the request for the zoning, and it's consistent with the adopted future land use plan, which recommends the site as low-density residential. This slide shows a blurb from the comprehensive plan that has a definition for low-density residential, and the site is aligned with this definition for single family. This slide represents the site plan that was submitted with the application. Please note the north arrow at the bottom of the page. So it would actually be flipped up to represent True North. There is an existing driveway that has dimensions here that actually can hold 2 parking spaces, but it is a 3-bedroom proposed, so they are proposing additional parking on the back side of the property for that 1 additional parking space. There is an existing chain link fence along the back side of the property, and they will be putting in a wood fence for screening. There are going to be slats that are going to go into the fence line to provide adequate headlight sweep. On this side of the property for the headlight sweep, there is an existing chain link fence, but there's a mature tree located here, and when they pull in, there won't be any headlight sweep, so there is no screening requirement on this side of the property for the drive. This is the floor plan. Actually, this is the evacuation plan plus the floor plan that was submitted with the application. Here's a photo of the front of the property off Lipan Highway, and you can see the existing parking with the mature tree and vines for the headlight sweep. This is the side of the property where the additional parking will go. It'll actually be right along here where this fence line is, if approved. This is the application for a change of zoning from R12 light commercial to R12. And this is the application for the specific use permit. On November 3rd, 2022, city staff mailed out 22 public notices to all property owners within 200 feet and on the municipal tax roll within 200 feet of the subject property. Notice on October 26, 2022 was also published in the Hood County News as required by state law and the zoning ordinance. As of the writing, 1 letter has been received in favor and 0 letters have been received in opposition of the request. One more statement. The 2 property owners actually live in Granbury, and they plan on maintaining the property and being on site when there's calls. The staff recommendation is approval for the change in zoning. Your voting options are to approve the request of the change in zoning from R12 LC to R12 or deny the request of the change in zoning from light commercial R12 to R12. Thank you.
Question.
Questions?
This is strictly for the change in zoning, is that correct?
Yes.
Not the approval of the,
SUP.
Well, if you have a question regarding either of them, we can discuss that now, and then we can do the motions.
well, I mean, I have no problem with the zoning, so
Oh, okay.
I just want to be clear that it's the zoning only.
Correct.
Do we have any questions of D4 or D5 right now while Amy is here?
I do.
Well, I mean, there are obviously some conditions that have not been met, and so how they're going to be stipulated. There's no parking, there's no place for, there's a space to put a concrete parking space in, but it's not there.
Correct. When we go through the voting options and staff recommendations for the specific use permit, there will be conditions that will apply to that.
I see. Okay, thank you.
That'll be on the next slide.
Amy, go over again what he's going to do on that back fence to provide privacy. You said he's going to put slats in the chain link?
Correct. There will be wood slats. Do you actually, would you prefer the applicant to come up and explain?
Okay, let's
Okay.
All right, thank you. I will open the public hearing and like to call the applicant to the podium.
I'm Brian Romberg. I'm the property owner there. I also live at 2104 Long Creek Court on the north end of town. So I'm not actually in the city, I'm in the county. But we moved here for retirement and to be around our grandkids, and we want to be a good citizen of Granbury. So we found this property, wanted to improve it, done several others. And so the question about the driveway is if we get approved, that's part of the condition, and we want to go ahead and put that in. But we want to find out if we get approved before we put the investment of doing that. And with the slats on the fence, yes, the intent is to put a privacy fence around the whole backyard. Right now it's just chain link, so we want to put a 6-foot privacy fence around the backyard and then just 4 foot high along that.
Okay, so you are replacing it with a 6-foot fence, a
Yeah,
wood fence?
Yeah, 6-foot fence. It's kind of hard to see on the picture, but where the chain link fence is now that would contain the backyard, that would become a 6-foot fence. Because where the direction for the new driveway, that would only be a 4 foot high, so you'd still have vision down the
Okay,
street.
so you're removing the chain link and putting in a total private wood fence?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Any further questions of the applicant? All right, I have no other speaker cards, so I'll close the public hearing.
Thank you.
And then we'll open up the recommendation on D4 for approval in the change in zoning.
I'll move the zoning be approved.
I have a motion by Mr. Haas for a motion for approval. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Grace. All in favor? Opposed? Motion passes for change in zoning.
Okay,
All right.
we'll move forward with the specific use permit.
All right.
Let me get to this. I can't read that, so I'm going to try to get to my printout that has the conditions. Give me 1 second. Okay. A 1-year SUP term in which the applicant must apply for another SUP once the 1-year term is complete. 2, the site shall conform to the site plan, Exhibit A in the proposed ordinance, and the floor plan, Exhibit B in the proposed ordinance. 3, the SUP shall be limited to not more than 3 bedrooms. 4, except as provided in these conditions, the SUP shall be subject to the supplemental standards as contained in the zoning ordinance. 5, this SUP is subject to all other city code requirements, permits, periodic inspections, and an inspection fee as established in the city's master fee schedule. 6, any violation of the supplemental land use standards or terms and conditions stipulated in the SUP may be deemed in violation of the zoning ordinance, and the SUP may become null and void, and/or the certificate of occupancy may be revoked. 7, hard surface paving, concrete, or asphalt installation prior to issuance of certificate of occupancy to comply with the 2 off-street parking requirements. Okay, that's inaccurate. I'll update that in the ordinance. It's for 3 parking spaces. Oh, I see what you're saying. Okay. As a reminder, if the Planning Commission does not act favorably on the change of zoning request, the request for the SUP permit must be denied. But you approved, so we can disregard that statement. Your voting options for the SUP are 1, approved as presented, 2, approve with additional or other conditions, 3, continue the item to the next public hearing if more information is needed, or 4, deny the request. Thank you.
Thank you. We have a question, Amy, I believe.
Yes, ma'am. On the site plan, it says 4-foot wood fence. He says 6 foot, so can we clarify that before?
Let me look at that real quick. Oh, okay. So that, the location of the 4-foot fence, he stated on the, I'm going to go to that slide, it makes it easier. I'm a visual person. Okay. So the dashed lines up here, that will be a 4-foot fence. Everything else around the property that is existing chain link will be a 6-foot. Okay.
That is so that traffic on that road can see that vehicle moving. Is that the purpose of the 4-foot fence?
I just wanted to make sure. Thank you.
Thank you. We can go back to D5, voting options. All right. I believe you were done, correct? Okay. All right, D5, I'll entertain a motion.
I'll move for approval with the additional condition that D7 be corrected to specify 3 parking spaces, as this is a 3-bedroom STR.
A motion for approval with the additional conditions as stated by Mr. Hoff. So I have a second.
Second.
A second by Mr. Grace. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion passes for D5. And I believe that's it, isn't it? All right, there's no further items on the agenda, and this motion, or this meeting is adjourned.